Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Edit here. I'm joined by Arieh. Arieh Frosh is a London-based artist working with an interdisciplinary approach using writing, 3D computer animation, motorized sculptures, and film to form narrative-based projects. His recent research interests are around how technology, language, and interspecies thinking can produce fictions that might question local contemporary conditions and their historic underpinnings, and could form generative alternatives. He has recently been a core participant in Spur World, a 6-month virtual residency, an online community exploring art making exercises of co-creation and Imagineering, with an online exhibition that is currently open to view on Spur World. He is also part of Cypher Billboard's 2021 programme, where he produced a series of workshops and a collaborative public artwork and radio show with students at Bounds Green School in London, alongside artist Ed Compson, focusing on wind capture and visualisation. And if you also want some additional educational background, he's a graduate of critical practice from the Royal College of Art, London in 2020, and has a BFA from the University of Oxford in 2015. Hello, Arieh, how are you doing?
Hey, yeah, all right. How are you doing? We've already spoken.
Yeah.
we know we're fine.
I mean, from that bio, where do we start? You know, it feels like in the last year, since we both graduated from the
Yeah.
RCA.
So we studied kind of together.
Yes. I mean, yeah, like I always found tangent already. I always found that weird how critical practice and public sphere were always, I don't know, they felt quite paired in a way.
Yeah.
Maybe more so than what the other two pathways like performance and moving image were. You know, like even though that was CAP as a whole, I don't know, I always found there was this kind of affiliation between critical practice and public sphere. I don't really know why.
Yeah, we studied next to each other, I think. Like not quite with each other, but there was like this like overlap of themes. And I think
Yeah.
we were quite literally like next to each other quite a lot in the studio.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Yeah.
and in the second year we were actually like
Yeah.
about 3 meters away from each other. But
Yeah. And then our Zoom windows.
yes, and
Yeah.
laterally, yeah. But I always feel not that I was playing catch up, but maybe in like a subconscious sense, whatever you were doing or what your interests were then starting to kind of thread into what I was interested in, and then it was maybe only kind of few months, 6 months, year down the line, I'll be like, oh wait a second, Ari did kind of something like that, not long ago. That just makes me
Yeah.
feel like a copycat now. I'm saying it out
No, it
loud.
makes it sound, but I don't think you are. But yeah, I've been implanting them very slowly into your mind and in your notebooks. I just put little notes that might trigger a project that I've done before. But no, you're because you did some work on these like I guess fictionalized leisure centers.
Yeah, yeah,
And then yeah, that was something I was doing. I was something similar I'd done prior to the RCA. But I think yeah, I don't know. I think you got there in a different route to me.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
think also like locationally it was quite interesting because it was when I was living in Glasgow and like
Yes.
had quite like a yeah, like well, it was quite like Glasgow orientated in terms of I think I was working for a little bit, I worked for like South Lanarkshire Council. And I think that like not council, South Lanarkshire, it was like leisure
Culture.
and
Yeah.
culture, yeah.
Yes.
Leisure. I don't know what was leisurable, but yeah, um, and that sort of like that kind of tie to place that those roles have. They're quite like specific in the way that they like you always have these. I guess just in protocols that you would have anyway. Like I was doing like library work, but then there's something that's within that ends up being quite specific to a place. And that project for me was a lot about trying to write that specificity into this fabrication of a leisure centre. And I think that with yours, they're obviously like very often like the dialogue you use and like the archive footage you use and like uh, um, the word just like names of things. It's like often like very like colloquial, or like you use yeah. I'm not gonna try and say any of the phrases. I never got good at a Scottish accent.
I think something I kind of realized recently is the kind of senses of, I suppose, macro and micro in my practice, where it can be like hyper specific, like you know, well, what I wrote recently for Montez Press, which is similarly, you know, like leisure centre, but North Lanarkshire.
Rivalry.
Yes, that is quite weird how that came about, but it was it's because it was a Coatbridge Leisure Centre that I used to go to when I was younger, and for some reason that just kind of popped into my head when I started thinking about where to kind of base this piece of text, and then it kind of fitted well with, like you say, the kind of colloquialisms, and because it was local, and I suppose that's kind of how my dissertation came about as well, because I was, you know, writing this, and I had a tutorial with someone, and they're like, "Oh, where's it based? Like, what's the location?" I was like, "Oh, I don't know," and then they're like, "Make a location," and then I was like, "Okay, well, make it somewhere I know," and it makes it kind of, you know.
That was on your dissertation was on a similar project, right? Like,
I suppose it's kind of developed that way, hasn't it? Because it
for
was
people watching. What was it?
you're plugging me now. It's meant to be about you and your work. So it was about this kind of, it was like a parafictional dossier in a way, where each chapter of it was coming from like a conflicting account of another kind of unreliable narrator, I suppose. But they all held different viewpoints regarding this this local monument, which isn't, it's like a purely fictionalized monument, but it was in like based in my local hometown. So some of the facts that went into kind of the reasoning behind it are based on real people and real articles and real bits of history from the town, but then there is also that kind of fictionalized aspect of it. And then the final chapter is this kind of argumentative panel discussion between all four of the characters. But then that kind of summarized the whole of my first year at the RCA. I think it was kind of quietly leading all the way up to that, and I didn't really realize that at the time, and then it just kind of took off from there, and everything has seemed to kind of either stem from that or lead back into that in a way, because then what was happening with the monument was it was meant to be getting redeveloped, and then after I finished the dissertation, then the next stage was like, oh, it'll be redeveloped into a swimming pool, you know. And that's where the whole kind of leisure centre thing kind of came about. But it was when I was kind of doing that I realized you're interested in kind of fictioning and kind of narrative and how that works with your own writing as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, writing definitely plays quite a big part in all of my projects. Like particularly fictional, or like, I guess similar to you, will like pick maybe from some source text and then augment them really. The term like fictioning, I think you just used, which was like one that I kind of came onto in the second year of RCA, like through that book by David Burrows and Simon O'Sullivan, fictioning, and yeah, I mean, I was working that way, and then they've got kind of this amazing like collection really of like art practices and analysis of like what those art practices are doing in the way that they employ fiction, and the way they employ it is as a verb, so like an active act of fictioning that might in the like most like I don't know, condensed. It's quite a thick book, and I've not read all of it. But like
It's a
a
big book,
condensed,
yeah.
condensed version, like I might suggest uh, different, like either alternatives or augment like actual ones, or like whatever that real is. But it's like very considered in terms of what the kind of contemporary like conditions are, be they like geographical or like political or like machine based. That was one of the things I was like most drawn to in that book, because I was like working with technology and looking at uh, so technology through like 3D animation and also kind of like very amateur robotics and and like, if you can call it that, and maybe I shouldn't talk myself down. Do all
Well,
of
no,
that.
this is one of the things I wanted to come on to, was like I suppose that
Okay, sorry.
that really kind of culminated in my head with your use of kind of narrative and fictioning through the harpies that you were making in our
Yeah.
second year at the RCA, and how that involved like
Mm.
robotics, but also animation, and how these kind of narratives of kind of mythic creature per se, but then how they embodied like as a kind of harbinger of, well, I wouldn't say not the apocalypse, but like harbinger of, I don't know. Maybe you're better explaining
Well, I
this.
did kind of feel like they were there, yeah, for a long time. Well, it was more, I was drawn to them. The myth thing did come into it, but I think it was through like this kind of hybridity of them, the harpy being like the half bird, half person, well, half woman, or like with loads of other creatures thrown in there sometimes. Um, and I was just interested, without going into too much in, but in that kind of like interspecies move. So something that like relies on like, or on like a yeah, I guess on like a crossing of species, or a seeing as like a total like connectedness and kind of resistance to the separatism of humans and nature. And then it was that like they talk about that a little bit in fictioning, and where this bit on like mytho technesis, where it's kind of the coming together of like a machine with like a biological, or like with the coming together of like technology and maybe a biological thing to form something else. Um, in what is one use of it. And I felt like, yes, that was kind of the move I was trying to make with those. But I basically come across these drawings of harpies in in the work by like a naturalist called Ulysses Aldrovandi, from, I think it's the 16th century, and he's got these amazing drawings of, he's got this ornithology, where it's like a taxonomy of birds, and the drawings in there are like really amazing, but they basically do all depict like real birds, and then there's this harpy in there, and it also looked loads like me. It just like, my hair's tied up, but it had like flowing hair, flowing like blonde hair, and like similar nose. I was like, oh, this, yeah. I don't think that's how I normally work, like grabbing something that's like me and trying to use it. But I think maybe that was one of the reasons I found it more interesting. But yeah, so then I built these animations and sort of moving sculptures from those, and kind of wrote a separate like selection of dialogues for them, where they had been in this sort of unspecified green space for quite a long time, maybe forever. Maybe that's why you think it's like a harbinger. Also, I think maybe they just look a bit menacing, but
I
I think
think it was.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I think it was just the. That's a good word actually. It was. It felt like the menacing nature of how they seem to appear in the
Mm,
text when I read it, kind of for the first time end to end. The text that was part of the degree show last year. I think like, well, I mean the way it was laid out, kind of partly diagrammatic, partly fluid text that I suppose didn't necessarily need to be read from point to point, but But yeah, just the feeling that there was this kind of small group of harpies that were kind of constantly overlooking whoever was passing through the park and kind of analysing and commenting on what they were doing. It did feel quite menacing as a concept.
Yeah, well, I kind of wanted them to be like misinterpreted and like always trying to understand why people had this kind of reaction to them, because they're depicted in quite like a derided way in by the histories by different writers. And there isn't really a reason for that. I was trying to see them as like this positive kind of representation of a sort of hybridity, and then but having to deal with all these people that were totally getting it wrong.
That kind of brings up another thing that maybe you embedded it a year ago and I just didn't know, but like, and I've mentioned this in another interview, just my kind of fascination with birds recently and how birds seem to be appearing everywhere. And I can specifically remember actually one photo I took of a seagull when we were in Venice at the Biennale, and it was just kind of perched on this little paving stone, and it was just like this kind of little bulbous figure because you couldn't see its legs or anything like that. And I don't know, that image has kind of stuck in my head, and it's always kind of been there, but it was only until recently when I said, writing the Montez Press thing, that it really kind of came out, writing through birds, and I thought, oh no, I'm just like copying Arieh again.
I mean, it's fine. I think I'm just copying other people.
But there does seem to be a fascination with people writing speculative fictions or fictioning kind of either through characters or the way the kind of art is presented is like a parafiction in itself. And I feel that that's like a really strong concept in a lot of art nowadays. But maybe that's just generalizing.
Yeah, I mean, I think also particularly like the courses we were doing. Yeah, I mean, characters. That's something that's quite important to me because I think I was just trying to like get rid of this. Maybe it was trying to get rid of me in some ways, but like trying to get rid of this like all-knowing narrator that would be able to like kind of dictate everything that was happening. So then this character will do like often like quite flawed things. Instead trying to like bring together maybe like this big network of ideas or stories, and then they're kind of like one node is what I often think of them as, to like enter this kind of collapse of like ideas or stories. So I think that's what the harpies are really. I tend to that's sort of how I've tended to use character, and it's also I think like why like over the last few years I've ended up having these sort of like kind of animal forms that like are dictating a lot of projects, and sometimes I'm trying to like not like not use an animal because it's sort of straight, it's just sort of like followed a line of thinking, but it's more about a way of thinking about character. I think recently, so like I did Spur, like you mentioned it in the intro, which has been this like really generous like online residency for graduates, run by like Jerry Holder and like Megan Brobeno, and well, like I'm not actually going to name everyone. I was thinking like if I start naming everyone, but I've named 2 people.
You start to dig yourself a hole.
Yeah, I'll be like, oh my god, okay, and everyone else. But it well, I mean, maybe I should mention this. It was sort of like some of the concept came from this Berlin collective called Omsk Social Club, and it was very much based around avatars, and it was like your like discussion or like your discursive point in these like custom-made worlds with the other residents was through an avatar, and then the exhibition, which is on Unity, is basically it's like the sort of I don't know, a kind of subconscious of each avatar. So for that it was like, I got away from the animal a little bit, but it was this use of character that was quite important. For that, my character was a bag of, this like sequence of bags of bones, and they were kind of there was this dispersed. They were like a dispersed character, so you could kind of enter in lots of different points, and through clicking on them, it was presented as an interactive work, and through clicking on each bag, it would bring like a narrative or a film that would like maybe meditate on those on like this idea of classification of species, and like this the notion that maybe these bags of bones were a form of species, and the sort of like mishaps in trying to classify them, and then each, as you clicked, depending on the order you clicked, it would bring like a different order of things that would come up. So it was also about that kind of like probability. Yeah, and it involved a visit to this archaeologist in Cyprus, and he has this amazing collection of animal skeletons. It's like huge.
Wait, so
yeah.
were they
Sorry, it's a bit
were they
tiny.
were they deliberately connected projects, or is that like for because you did the Cyprus residency, and is that what led into what you were doing at Spur, or?
No, like so sorry. I went to Cyprus College of Art on like a couple of month residency.
Well, it turned into a couple of months.
Yeah, it turned into it. It was just a couple of weeks, and then lockdown happened, and then I just ended up there for 2 months in the end, which was great, and I'm very appreciative. I could not be in a London bedroom for a bit. But yeah, sorry. But before that, I was starting to think about this character. Actually, from like I'd read this ages ago, and then I'd still thought about it. But Marquez is 100 Years of Solitude. There's this one of the characters, Rebecca, turns up with holding like a bag full of her parents' bones that won't stop rattling, and they like reappear throughout the book. Yeah, so I was thinking about that a little bit, and then in Cyprus, there was an archaeologist lived next door, basically, and this is a whole other point, but in the RCA, I'd also been working on a project of this tortoise falling, and that was related to the playwright Aeschylus, who was potentially or like supposedly killed by a tortoise being dropped on his head by an eagle, which does happen, although they're vultures that do it. And the archaeologists happened to have a tortoise that had been dropped by a vulture on some rocks, and he had the skeleton from that. So it was like, oh, this is like it's ridiculous. But then so some of the filming relates to that. I think actually that film will also be part of that project. So they kind of, it was a bit coincidental, but it worked out like. But most of my stuff in Spur in the show is from that residency. Most of the filming and a lot of the writing as well. I think, I don't know, I hadn't done a residency like that before, and I think actually that was quite good way. It turned out to be a really good way for that work to come together, which was like kind of collating, and not overly questioning like why, for once, not overly questioning like why I was collating all this stuff, and then coming back and like reflecting on it and forming something for something else with it. Yeah.
I think it's so I didn't know that's where the bag of bones like came from, or the bags of bones. From
it was like one part.
But yeah, there seems to be that well, maybe in the most recent projects that I'm more familiar with of yours, where there's this kind of one very abstract element of, a piece of historical text, or like maybe a myth or something like that yes is very kind of specific, and I'm trying to think of another word than abstract, but I can't think of the right one. But that seems to what forms the kind of initial inspiration or basis of what a project may be. So then you've got the turtle, or you've got harpies, or a tortoise, sorry, the bag of bones, or what you used in day zero when you were talking about the algae and where that kind of piece of text came from as well.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think about, where it is that kind of hyper abstract kind of element, but then, sorry, maybe I'm not explaining it well, and I'm just insulting you by saying hyper abstract. But
well, I was wondering what that meant. Like, no, I think you're on something in terms of, definitely there's like a initiating point often, like, or like an initiating like narrative point that I can then build from. Yeah, sometimes it is like grabbing onto something I think is interesting and has like an opening in there, basically, to be explored, either like through through fiction, or just like or messed around with. But then sometimes it's not so planned, like Day Zero that you just mentioned, which is like it's an exhibition in Buenos Aires, organized by Cynthia Carlini, our friend,
yes.
an artist. And she invited us both, right, to like submit videos to it. But on water, it's in an old water pumping station. But so again in Cyprus, I'd filmed just like because I thought it looked amazing. I'd come across this swimming pool at night that was full of this. It was an algal bloom. So when algae just suddenly like just reproduces like that. And the swimming pool was like that because obviously of COVID, it was like part of this big like complex. It was on the seafront, and like where there would normally be all these like rented villas, but obviously they were all totally empty. And then this big pool had just been left. I found out afterwards, speaking to someone who knows about algae, that it was dead. The algal bloom that I filmed. So what often happens is like they bloom in response to like a certain pollutant, and then either this one was like killed, or often they like reproduce to oblivion. So like they take in all the resources and reproduce to the point that there's like nothing more they can take in, and then it dies. Which I really liked. That's how I'm trying to live. It's not. I'm very calm. But yeah. So then when Cynthia sort of mentioned what I thought I'd start with that. But then I tied it into a story by Isaac Bashevis Singer, a story called Hanker, which is about him, not him, a writer, a Yiddish writer who, I mean, is very much like him, traveling to Buenos Aires. And there's a moment where on the boat he describes this like big orgy in the sea, and in it the algae is there joining it. So I tied it to that. And yeah. Well, yours was about Scotland.
Surprisingly enough. I think it's actually kind of interesting, kind of on that note, where we'd mentioned kind of hyperlocality and especially the writing of mine recently being very colloquial and things. But I don't know if that's just something that seemed to emerge more when I was in London. So it was almost like harking back to where I came from. Or with this really tragic, depressing monologue of like, I am Scottish, see it in my writing. I don't know. But it is something that seemed to kind of bloom when I was down there, and then it's kind of gone on since. But yeah, so for day zero, I had found this really random, again, hyper abstract narrative of no, it's not. No, it was when, well, I suppose in oh, this is a whole chain of events, I suppose. But
Yeah.
in our second year at RCA, when I was specifically doing a lot of research on abandoned swimming pools, and then over the Christmas break, I'd come back to Glasgow to be with my family over Christmas, and then the horrific son I am dragged my parents up to the north of Scotland. No, they were actually very keen to go, but basically we went for one night. We travelled, God, like 200 miles or something like that to go. I've actually forgotten the name of the place. Well, it's called Tarware Swimming Pool, really North Aberdeenshire, Banff, just outside of Banff, and so it's this swimming pool that has been abandoned since the late 90s, because it just kind of ran out of business and it wasn't doing as well. But it's this like huge concrete pavilion area in a cove, because it's an open air sea fed swimming pool. So one of very few of its kind that's still left in the UK. So we went there and I just kind of did some photography and filming and singing and stuff like that. But then for day zero, when that transpired, when Cynthia asked us, well, it's kind of in some way to do with water. I can remember I was on a walk with my dad, and I didn't know what direction I was going to take. But I can specifically remember like entering that thinking, I want to try and find some kind of random affiliation between Scotland and Buenos Aires to try and bring a kind of site specificity to what the exhibition might be. And then my dad just randomly came out and said, hang on a second, when we were in Banff, wasn't there like a guy from the 1800s that was from Argentina?
He was there. He was still around.
He was still there, still walking the streets. But yeah, no, and so like I looked into it. So yeah, there's this whole relationship between like specifically Buenos Aires and Banffshire, because what was then the Earl of Banff, the fourth Earl of Banff or something. I can't remember off the top of my head now. But he had fought alongside what then became a general in the Argentinian army, and they kept that kind of relationship going at even years later, and this Earl helped the general emigrate to Europe eventually, but one of the tokens was that he had, because the Earl had this really kind of exotic garden in his estate, and he tried to kind of collect plants and trees and things like that from all over the world. So this general had brought over a monkey puzzle tree from Buenos Aires, and this was in the 1800s. And then in I think like the 1950s, the ambassador of Buenos Aires had come to kind of rekindle relationships with Scotland again. So had again brought a token monkey puzzle tree, and that's still said to still be in that garden on the estate. So it just seemed to be the really random kind of narrative that I really enjoyed, and you were the one that said, "Oh no, that's really interesting. I think you should go with it." So I think kind of things spiraled from there, where it then became like this whole speculative journey of a character taking a monkey puzzle tree back to Buenos Aires for the exhibition.
But I think you were like playing on the I don't know, like romance of, or like symbolism a little bit of the tree. Like your video, you're very like overly I don't know, it's like got these overly romantic shots of you like standing in front of a loch, like holding the puzzle tree, and like with like slowed down. What song is it? It's playing.
Over the
Sorry.
sea to sky.
Yeah, play like
Yeah.
like I don't, yeah.
I think it's because like that, that whole process of Cynthia getting in touch with us and then needing to kind of think of an idea, do it, and then kind of present it. It felt to me like quite a short time frame. So I felt like I was latching on to the first idea, or one of the first ideas I had, and then ran with it. So because of that, I thought the whole thing was a bit daft. So I just needed to kind of accentuate that.
But there's also like there's a bit of a daftness to that sort of like diplomacy as well.
Yeah.
Or like diplomatic gesture. I think it's quite funny.
Yeah, that's
to
true.
then make it really meaningful. It was quite a quick turnaround. But yeah, it was. I don't know. I think maybe it made me make some quite quick decisions.
You can just kind of sit on things and wait for them to figure themselves out in a way. You needed to make the decisions. You were put in that position to be decisive, which is maybe sometimes unlike what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Drag things out. And I ended up animating these like thing. They were just like green globules, but based on like cyanobacteria cells, or like more like on algae cells, which are kind of similar, but and like falling from the sky and dropping on each other. But I think that was because at that time I was like doing a lot of 3D modeling for this other project for Cypher Billboard, and it's just like it sort of it made sense in some ways. But I like those parts of the film.
Yes.
Yeah,
No.
and like satisfying.
And it's there now and it's all installed, and we thought it was going to open, but then with they're kind of behind what we've experienced in COVID, so they're in kind of lockdown now, and so it just wonders if anyone will get to ever see those films.
Well, so it's in a space, but maybe open in a few months. We'll see. So I mean, they're just playing.
Just over and over. But like I've not even seen your fully finished things. I saw I saw clips, but I've still not actually seen the full thing. That's fine. So I'm really excited to see what.
What did you
think? But you mentioned Cypher Billboard then, because that's another thing that you've done / doing recently, with Ed. So do you want to go? Do you want to go over that a bit more and kind of how that came about?
Well, it's part of Cypher Billboard. They're like a little arts organisation that have this billboard in Bounds Green, North London, that have different artists sort of producing projects for the billboard and in the local area over the course of the year. Quite amazing ones actually. And we actually applied. There was an open call. They did an open call, and me and Ed applied with a project and got it, which was very nice. And it was so it was a project with Year 4 students at Bounds Green School, and we were talking about like wind energy generally, but like particularly how we can imagine or like how do we visualize wind, and also like how do we capture kind of data of wind, and what can you do with that kind of data. A book I was reading at the RCA called Pandemonium by Humphrey Jennings, which talks about like the change. It's this big collection of sources, right, from like I think it's from the 17th century to the 19th century, that's like from like letters and novels and like diaries, and it's it kind of outlines how people's imaginations changed with the coming of like the Industrial Revolution, and with this like big rhetoric that the UK are putting forward in relation to wind energy to tackle like the climate crisis. Like Boris Johnson called it the Saudi Arabia of wind, the UK, which is yeah, and like while we were doing the project, like BP bought loads of land off the coast that was owned by the Queen to form these wind farms. And it was like with these kind of narratives going on that are kind of being taken on by like well, the Tories and big like oil companies, and sort of like yeah, the way that they're kind of taking the narrative a little bit of tackling the climate crisis. We wanted to think about like, oh, what is this going to do to imagination, or like what might like a proliferation of like wind energy, how could that affect people's imaginations in ways that might not be like yeah, I don't know, it might be a bit more subtle, or and so one of the things we did was like we made these ended up having to be video workshops because of lockdown, but we made these workshops that kind of spoke about like different like well, firstly about how like wind turbines work, and then different ways that wind has been represented by like different kind of like gods, from like our Aeolus, or yeah, another example. And also in like in like Hokusai and like Jeffel, and or like Howl's Moving Castle, or like yeah, I mean Studio Ghibli do it a lot. They like a lot of their films look at the wind, and Pokemon. But yeah, and we got the students to design these like wind turbines of their own that were more informed by these things, and they came back with these like quite amazing drawings. Like one of them had like a heart that was pumping around these bees, and it was sitting in a bin. And then I like 3D modeled those, and that an image of them combined like is on the billboard. And we were also capturing wind data from the site. So then we did another workshop where like we encouraged them to make these sounds based on intensity of wind, and we speak about like different like not wind instruments like a recorder, but like, or the bagpipes which you play, you do actually play very well, or
believe.
yeah, cut to you playing, and then but like things like the Aeolian harps which like use wind to like just create noise, and they came back again, like I think the music teacher got involved, and they made these like really amazing short pieces of music about different intensities of wind, and then we matched it with the wind speed data that we'd collected to form this kind of like automatic composition. I mean, to be honest, I then did, like we did it slightly differently. That was the plan, and then so we formed a composition based with their recordings, and then another one using the data. But yeah, that was quite long. I think that was like everything in the project. Or now there's a publication, but more on that.
No, but the whole project is absolutely brilliant. And yeah, when I mean the drawings that seem to like from some of the drawings that I saw, and then how they kind of manifest into the 3D animations are just like spectacular. And so with the with all these sound recordings, along with the recorded data of the wind, is that what's going to kind of form the kind of radio?
Oh yeah.
Thing?
So we did the radio show.
Oh no, did I miss it?
Yeah,
Oh no,
well, I can send it to you. It's on the internet.
Okay.
Yeah, with Threads Radio, like quite cool. They're like a local radio station. Yes, yeah. So that was what formed it. Yeah, but it was, I don't know, it was like one of the most wholesome projects I've ever done. I think it was something really nice.
And it seemed to get
also
really
just like
good
reaching out. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, no, I was going to say, you just seemed to get really great interaction and feedback from the children that did it, you know, and like
yeah. I mean, there was a bit of distance in the like we'd planned these workshops in person, and then kind of just had to wait to see what they gave back instead. But But just in terms of like, I think I mean, this kept coming up at the beginning of COVID about like, oh, like people reaching out on top of like dealing with loads of other stuff for like collaborative projects rather than, or like, yeah, I was definitely doing that. I know, I think you were doing it as well. But then there are a few things like I think Spur, and I think this Cypher Build project, I think some of the things we worked on like last year did really feel like, oh, actually, no, this is like genuinely sort of, well, like sustaining, not just like on like a selfish level, like in terms of creating these, yeah, I don't know, like looking outward and creating groups of people that are producing things that are sort of strange and like give us maybe a bit of a reason to do anything or like understand things. Yeah. You're doing it all around like running a whole theatre.
Yes, I'm running the theatre.
Yeah.
No, but part of a team. But
yeah.
But yeah, that's been really quite unexpected. I think.
Yeah.
You know.
Your involvement in the theatre.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then also how it's transpired. You know, maybe initially thinking going into that, I was just like super lucky and appreciative and over the moon that I was able to get a job during lockdown when, you know, so many people were losing them. Never mind, you know, never mind actually getting one. I kind of bucked a trend, and I feel like one of very few people, so very privileged in that sense. But then going in and actually finding that I was really enjoying what I was doing, and the fact that, you know, you maybe go into a youth theatre context and you think, oh, it's going to be they're going to be doing Shakespeare or Les Mis or something like that.
Do you think
know,
that?
I don't know, or some some sort of musical type thing. You know, like a kind of conventional, maybe restricted traditional sense.
I sort of picture more like I don't know. I guess like real, like really like trying to place it politically, and like yeah, that's what I sort of normally think they do.
Well, interestingly, that's exactly what it is, and it's actually like extremely forward thinking, and I'm really impressed and blown away by how kind of radical some of the projects are, and how they are, you know, really kind of championing social engagement and mental health and well-being and kind of diversity and equity, and, you know, all these things, and the projects that they've got on right now. Some are helping really local communities, but then some are trying to create networks between different youth theatres like all around the world. So it's just, yeah, I'm really blown away by how great the company is. So if anyone actually watches these and even lasts to this this point in them where they're like the 40th minute, oh my god, they're still going. No, but I've asked everyone to submit some what I'm calling the Tracks to Topia segment. And yeah, I would just be saying the same thing in every video basically, but it's where I'm trying to create a community soundtrack where I'm getting all you guys that I've had like conversations with to submit one or a few tracks that they imagine would be playing once we all jump on a ship at the end of the world, and whether that's traveling towards dystopia or utopia, it's kind of your choice. So we've had some very kind of conflicting soundtracks, which will make it a really interesting playlist, I think. But we've had like Janet Jackson, we've had Muse, we've had Corny Barnett. So there's a whole eclectic mix, which is great. But Do you want to say what you've chosen, and is there a reason behind it as well?
Yeah. Well, when when you said this like ship is leaving, I think like someone else you spoke to, I pictured like a ship on the sea. Not like something that would get out of the planet. I didn't really realize it was the end of the world, but that's good to know. Yeah, then I've never listened to this person before, and then that day I was just listening, like I don't know, I think it was like just across different things. And this song is by John Fahey. He's a guitarist. It's called "On the Sunny Side of the Ocean." But I wasn't sure if it was optimistic or like melancholic, like listening to the guitar, and I think it kind of suits like a vagueness of either a utopia or a dystopia. Especially for me, not very good at choosing things. It's like, oh, this is somewhere in between. And the album cover has a harpy on it. It's like, oh,
it's perfect.
It's got to choose this. It's nice. Yeah. Brilliant. That's what I chose.
Okay, so on the sunny side of the ocean, we'll play that out. Thank you very much, Arieh. This has been a really insightful, rich discussion. No, genuinely,
yeah. Well,
I think, yeah.
Thanks for inviting me. It's it's very nice of you.
Of course.
And to Sadgrads, who obviously I've been following since the beginning, because of various, for solidarity reasons, but also because of the RCA's handling of things and our ongoing dealing with them. But yeah, so thank you, Sadgrads.
Yes, thank you very much, Sadgrads. This has been great. I hope you're not too bored. Both yourself, Arieh, and anyone that might be watching right now. But no, thanks very much, Arieh.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.